All right, welcome back or welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast by Amplos. My name is Cory Shaffer. I'm joined today by a very special guest, a friend of the podcast. Some may even consider her sort of the first lady of the podcast. I will consider her the first lady of the podcast.
Does that make you the president of the podcast?
Strictly just based off of number of podcasts, maybe, okay. Yes. But I have Dr. Kimberly Shaffer on the podcast today. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Cory. Thank you so much for having me on this wonderful afternoon.
All right. Well, what are we getting into today, Dr. Shaffer? What's on your mind?
Oh, man. Well, in classic Kim fashion, I heard something, shot you a text thinking this was the most brilliant idea and we needed to discuss it on the podcast. And the irony of what I'm about to say is this is something that I'd say probably for about a year and a half, 2 years, you've been trying to implement in our own house. And I've just widely ignored you and been like, yeah, okay, and haven't done a good job at it. But then when I hear it and my light bulb goes off, then I all of a sudden think it's a good idea. But essentially what I was hearing was this idea of how to break up with your phone, due to the fact that we all probably overuse our phone, not just for social media, but for work. And we are constantly gazing at our phones and using it as a device for various different reasons. But the idea being that it's not so much as how to break up with it, but how can you rework the relationship with your phone in order to have a more healthy relationship and know when is it time to put it down, when is it time to focus on it, and at what cost is it coming all this time that you're spending on your phone. So I told you this would be a brilliant idea, and you're like, yeah, come on the podcast and talk about it. But that means I need to throw myself under the bus because admittedly, I am very, very bad at it.
Well, as we talk about quite a bit here on the Growth Project, growth starts with awareness. So thank you for sharing with our listeners. And so, all right, where do we begin here? How do we dive into this? I think you shared earlier maybe some relevant, albeit sad statistics. Why don't we start there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the stats being that the average person spends 4 hours a day on their phone. 4 hours a day equates to about 60 hours or 60 days a week. Nope, let's try that again. 4 hours a day, 60 days a year, which can equate to a sixth of your life on your phone. So just thinking about all the stuff that you're missing, and again, sad and depressing, so my brain doesn't like to think about it. But I'd even like to ask you, what would you say, like a year and a half, 2 years ago, when did you come to me and you're like, we need to be better about this. We need to put our phones down when we're with the kids. Like, what was your trigger? That was like,
it was ultimately just becoming a parent, just understanding the short time frame that we do have, especially when they're this young. And I think when they're really, really young, we're talking like, babies, infants. We understand that like they don't really have the awareness of what's going on. They don't even have oftentimes like the eyesight to be able to even make out what you're doing. Yeah. Let's say if you were on your phone, but as they start to get older, they start to develop, they start to communicate, they want to interact, they want to play, and so on. I think I just realized like how fragile, how important this little time span is for their future development. And beyond that, I think just the recognition, and part of this probably just comes from the nature of the things that I read, I consume, even if that's on a phone, is just for my own kind of sanity, well-being, realizing, understanding how much time I can still have the tendency to spend on my phone, but really without any real purpose or any need. Now, again, the cell phones, obviously technology, I don't think you or I are here to paint a picture of just like how bad it is. Okay. It's good for a lot of things. It was more so, again, as you're describing, like I wanted to change my relationship with it. And so if my phone is in my hands, kind of throughout the workday, and I'm doing things related to work and it's productive use and so on. And even if there's the occasional like pull up social media, like all that's fine. But when I walk through the door, I want to shift into dad mode And just in my mind, and I think the type of parent that I want to be is just one that's present.
Yeah.
Especially as you and I obviously have talked about plenty, but the nature of my job being sometimes I travel, just more than you do. And so I always feel like I'm making up for time missed.
Yeah.
And if I'm doing that and I'm like physically present, but just completely mentally and emotionally absent, it just feels like I'm robbing myself of the experience, but more importantly, my kids of the experience of just having a dad that's present. So.
Yeah, and I think that it's funny, the like mind games that we play with ourselves in regards to the content that is okay and acceptable on the phone when we're around the kids, because oftentimes I'm not scrolling social media. I save that for when we're withering away in bed before we go to sleep. But I'm like, oh, I'm checking the score of something, or I'm looking at my email. One of my students needs to contact me. And so we almost can like justify it and like, it's okay because this is, or it's the news and I'm consuming, like it's on CNN, this is important content, right? So even what we engage with, but still in the eyes of a 3-year-old, it's, you're not being present here for me, and instead you're doing something else. But to, at least since we're talking about justifying, for me to justify it and make myself feel a little bit better about how did I get to this point of just always wanting to be on my phone, there is science and research to back it. So it does make me feel a little bit better. And a lot of kind of this addiction sounds like a really strong word, but the tendency.
That's what it is.
Yeah,
that's what it is. You can call it what it is.
Okay, see?
We're all friends here.
Now you're pointing fingers. Fine.
No.
The phone addiction that not just I have.
No, I never said you. Everybody.
Okay.
Like this is the tendency of and like you said, cell phones, apps, all of them are designed to capture your attention.
Yes.
Your focus is what they're after, right? The longer time you spend on your phone, on apps, whatever, it's just money in their pockets. That's the point. So yes, they are legitimately designed to get your attention, to make you have the sensation of, I need this, like I'm addicted to it. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's like a slot machine, right? So the idea of you never know when that dopamine release or dopamine hit is going to come. So dopamine being our reward neurotransmitter, and when we do good things, right, that gets released in our brain. But the idea of not knowing when it's going to come is what keeps us going back for it. So if you've ever played a slot machine before, it's like, I can pull that little trigger and not know when that reinforcement, when that like, ooh, yay, I did it feeling is going to come. It's the exact same thing on the phone. And again, it doesn't just have to be scrolling social media. It's, I'm going to keep checking my email to see if I got that tracking number for that thing that I purchased, or I've been waiting on this email from so-and-so to set up a meeting for something, or I'm checking my workouts, or whatever it is you're constantly checking, but you never actually know what's going to be there. And that not knowing what's going to be there, that's kind of what keeps you hooked and going back, because it's this variable reinforcement schedule. And so that's one piece of it, is like, we like the dopamine, we don't know what's going to come. But then the other piece of it is when we're not on our phones, I'm sure we've all felt it, this anxiety that builds, this almost like a FOMO of like, what am I missing out on? Or we can justify it in our brains of like, what happens if there's an emergency, or what happens if somebody needs me? Or so it almost is like an OCD cycle, where the idea is you have anxiety and then you do something to reduce that anxiety, and then you feel better. And then you just kind of get in this vicious cycle. So I have anxiety being away from my phone, or not having my phone in my hand, or being present around it. And so then I check it, and then I feel better, and that anxiety goes away. And then that just gets worse and worse. What started off probably as, and I think we can all go back to even 5 years ago, I wasn't on my phone nearly as much as I was. And I do personally think some of that is the kid factor of, we had a lot of late nights and late night feedings, and I'm just like scrolling, doing things. And again, it didn't matter at that age so much, when they're literally just a burrito and I'm up at 3 a.m. trying to get them to go to sleep, scrolling my phone. But that habit builds and then it gets worse. And then again, there's if I'm not with my kids, well, maybe I need to be by my phone. Maybe someone's going to tell me something's going on with my kids. So whatever it is, right, it's this combination of we get a reward, we get the good stuff, the dopamine, and then we have anxiety and our phone makes us feel better and eases that anxiety.
Yeah.
So it's not just me.
Nobody ever said it was. Okay.
So, not taking it personally, not getting defensive.
Yeah, it sounds like
never.
it. Sounds like it. So I did a little bit of research and wanted to just understand. I think everybody's, to a degree, maybe familiar with this, maybe some of this research. I'll outline a handful of articles that I came across. I'll start actually with a term I was not familiar with, but this is a legitimate term that actually I learned and saw in a research paper, which is fascinating. But the term is phubbing, which is phone snubbing. Okay. So it occurs when someone in a social setting shifts their attention to a smartphone instead of engaging with the people around them, right? So you are ignoring your immediate social interactions in favor of your smartphone, all right? So what are the repercussions of this, right? Especially if we're talking, and this is going to be focused on, we could have focused on this in a number of different ways, okay? Even just as adults, there's research that shows, just having a smartphone on the table, if you sit and have dinner with somebody or you're in the middle of a meeting, it just distracts your attention enough for all the reasons that you described, where you're like a little less present, probably a little less emotionally responsive and so on. But so we start with phubbing. All right, that's what we're talking about here.
I like it.
But we're going to focus in on parenting. And this is focused on young kids. That's just happens to be the stage of life that we are in. Probably very relevant for plenty of our...
We're very much in it.
Yeah, so for plenty of our listeners. But so I started just like big picture here. There's research that shows the more that parents are engaging in cell phone use, so this phubbing, right, sort of phenomenon, how it actually can impact and stunt the emotional development of young kids. Okay, so
a little terrifying.
A little bit terrifying, no doubt, right? But the description, I thought it was really fascinating. So basically, what this research paper describes is that when you're on your phone, and just think about this for a second, right? Even just picking it, the next time you pick up your phone, try to pay attention to it. Your facial expression, okay? Mm-hmm. You pick up your phone, you're just scrolling through social media mindlessly, you're scrolling through your email, it doesn't matter. Typically, it's associated what is referenced as, quote, still face. So this expressionless, emotionless appearance that from the perspective of like a young mind comes across as nothing positive. Mm-hmm. And can't even almost be interpreted as like something is wrong or, mom or dad is like depressed potentially, something along those lines. And so
they're mad at me.
Sure. And if you think then about how they're missing out on when you're playing with them, think about how different the emotional expressions are, right? There's, you're smiling at them, you're engaging with them, you laugh, you make a pretend like you kind of furrow your brow, you act like you're mad or you're grumpy, like they're learning through each one of those interactions. But when you're just sitting there stone-faced looking at your phone, they're missing out on really, really important cues that aid in their emotional development.
Yeah.
So really, really interesting stuff there.
Drawing like anecdotally from our personal experience, how many times, even just the other night, Cameron is jumping around on pillows and he's at a stage where we don't necessarily have to play with him. He's really good. He'll drive his cars. He'll do what he's doing. But he looks up at us to make sure that we are watching and that we are engaged. And I just think about how many times, even we see it when we go to the playground all the time, right? All the parents are sitting on the bench on their phones. And then you see the kids at the playground like glance over at their parents like, oh, did mom see how high I swung? Or did dad see me go down the slide? And they're not getting that emotional reaction. They're getting a stone face. So then in that young mind, that perception can be, oh, they're not excited for me, or they don't think what I did was cool. And you don't even have to engage in those aspects, right? But they're picking up the cues that you're giving, and the cues that you're giving are there's no emotion, I don't care.
Just there's something else is more important.
Correct. This isn't important to me. So very anecdotally, I feel like we see this all the time in the world around us.
Yeah. So another study here sort of outlines how, in the mechanisms of this, like sort of the details of it, I guess, to use a simpler word there, I think they're still probably working through, but there is some initial evidence that parent-child interaction and like parental smartphone use during parent-child interaction actually affects children's language development. Again, probably for very similar reasons, right? Like there's less dialogue that's happening. There's probably a lot more head nods, canned responses,
Sure thing, buddy.
Yeah, buddy, you're doing great. They're literally, to a degree, it's like there's no eye contact. So they're now not picking up on, nonverbal cues, right? Think about the tone of your voice when you're just giving one of those kind of canned responses versus inflection and tone, if you're having a conversation with somebody. So some of it is your gaze, right? You're not getting eye contact, the responsiveness. So now they're saying, mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy, like not the first time, like that would never even happen if you were just interacting with them. Right. But because they see you not paying attention and they're trying to get your attention, right? Like it takes longer to respond. I think everything just about conversation and therefore language development is just like condensed, it's stripped down, and it impacts them in the long term. So again, fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that we're just going to never be on our phones around our kids. Like I also want to set some precedent of like, this is a piece of technology that's very much integrated into our worlds and our lives. And so it'd be foolish to think that we're just going to set it down and ignore it. But one of the things that we could do better at is if we are on our phone, and when that child asks, because again, Cameron's at that age where he'll ask, he'll be like, mommy, what are you doing? Daddy, what are you doing? Instead of the go-to just saying like nothing, because we want to brush them off and finish sending the email or finish checking the score, engage with them, right? Like, hey, bud, I'm just looking at the score of the so-and-so game because we like this team and we support them. And you're having a conversation and you're getting them involved a little bit more than just the standard. But I think we do the standard brush off because we internally feel like, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. So I'm just going to like ignore it and pretend that my 3-year-old, 4-year-old doesn't know what's going on. But they do notice. So when they ask, it's a good check for us to be able to have a conversation with them about it. And it doesn't mean that like it's a bad thing. Like just be honest, like mommy's scrolling through Instagram. He doesn't need to know what that is, but mommy's looking at pictures of friends and look, this is your uncle in Alabama or whatever it is. I mean, there's ways to include them in that.
Yeah. So I got a couple other studies here.
I really appreciate my inner professor is just
I just want to give context here, and I think it's helpful. It was helpful for me to just be reminded of this. I'm sure it's helpful for you, but basically what this research study is outlining says parents who use their phones during parent-child interactions are less sensitive and responsive, both verbally and non-verbally, to their children's bids for attention, potentially leading to lower quality parent-child interactions. We've sort of already established that. Here's a new layer, though. Is children actually engage in risky attention-seeking behaviors, which may actually be connected to an increase in childhood injuries.
Yeah, that makes sense.
but it's
that tracks.
It's fascinating though, right? Like to imagine the signal, as we've established, that you're sending to your kid, as long as you're just staring at your smartphone, they want to be interacting with you. They want to be playing with you. And basically what you're showing them is like, hey, playing with you is not the priority, right? Me looking at my phone, that's what's important. They want your attention.
Yeah.
So what do? They start doing risky stuff to try to get your attention. So that means jumping off the couch.
It is like, it's kid math 101. And I even just think of our daughter, Kennedy. She's almost a year and a half. So she's moving all over the place. And I'm trying to make dinner and I set her little bottom right there in the kitchen and I'm kind of half paying attention, but I'm trying to make dinner. It's like she knows, and now she's going to try to go climb up the stairs. Well, nothing gets mom to pay attention more. Like, I am going to stop making dinner. I am going to stop whatever I'm doing because now you're doing something really dangerous. Mm-hmm. And like everything else we're talking about, it's all reinforcement. So it's just like the phone provides us reinforcement. Our kids are learning this behavior. Like, I'm going to do something crazy because it's going to get you to finally notice me, which is terrifying as far as broken bones, stitches, all the above.
Right. All right. So this next study, really interesting. These last couple ones are pretty fascinating, like the method and stuff that they use. This is where research is just really interesting sometimes. Basically, it was looking at responsiveness again, but in parent-child exchanges, in this case, like trying to teach a child something. Okay. So what they did was they had 38 mothers. They were teaching their 2-year-olds, okay, 2 novel words, one at a time. All right.
Okay.
One teaching period was interrupted by a cell phone call. Okay. Children learned the word when the teaching was not interrupted, but not when it was interrupted.
Yeah.
Right. So the number of times each target word was spoken did not differ, which is like good sound research, right?
Yeah.
So just because they got on a phone call, they were still saying the word just as many times. But the point is, it didn't matter.
Yep.
When the learning was interrupted by the parent taking a phone call in this case, child didn't learn a word. So again, that goes back to what we just discussed, even from language development standpoint. Like the mounting evidence there is not great. Yeah. Right. The last study that I'll describe here, again, very interesting, cool. This one was strictly just observation. Okay, so this would be, like a research team, basically posting up. It seems like what they did here, they posted up in like a McDonald's. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so non-participant observational method. That's what that means, right? Like they're just observing people in the natural environment. Correct. They said they observed 55 caregivers eating with 1 or more young children in a fast food restaurant, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So essentially that's what they're doing, right? Yeah. Like they're posting up in a McDonald's and they're
Mom took the kids, we're eating lunch.
And they're just watching, like parents sit and how do they interact with their kids. Okay. So they were taking detailed notes, right? Describing all aspects of mobile device use and child and caregiver behavior during the meal. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's sort of our method. So the 55 caregivers that were observed, 40 used devices during their meal. Okay?
Yep.
So it said the dominant theme salient to mobile device use and caregiver-child interaction was the degree of absorption in the device caregivers exhibited. So how just absorbed do they get in the cell phone, basically? And they were looking at the frequency, the duration, and the modality of the device use, all right? Then child response to the caregiver. Mm-hmm. So what's the kid's interaction now, or their response to parent being on the phone? So here's what's really crazy. Highly absorbed caregivers who were just fixated on their phone often responded harshly to child misbehavior. Right? So think about it. Yeah. I'm just dialed into what I'm doing on my phone. Kids over here, maybe not even necessarily fully misbehaving. Yeah. But because it feels like now, like you're interrupting me and what I'm doing on my phone, that's when you get like the snap. Or
even more so, because we've both been there, right? We have been dialed into a game on our phone. Usually with us, it's watching sports, not that it makes it any better, but we've been dialed into something on our phone and the kids are doing something and we kind of snap. But I think at least the logic, or like in our brains, it's like, oh man, what have I missed? How long has this behavior been going on, right? Because I have been so absorbed in my phone. Have you been like causing a ruckus and throwing french fries on the ground for 30 seconds? Or have you been doing this for 6 minutes and I missed it? So I better, snap and make sure that this behavior knocks out. And I can absolutely 100%, I know we've both been in this scenario where we snap at our kids and it's not strictly because we're engaged in our phones, but yeah, we've all been there.
Yes.
Which,
but we're done with the research.
Yeah, man.
Doesn't
just
paint.
Do you feel like a bad parent right now? Because I do a little bit.
A pretty picture. Well, you gave me props from the start here, so
yeah. Let's go back and listen to the episode you did with Connor, where you talked about how wonderful of parents we think we're doing.
Yeah,
this one's like the opposite.
Right. It's humbling. Okay, but let's talk about kind of a way forward here. I know you came across something that you thought was really good and might be worth sharing to some other people, just as a simple, almost like heuristic.
So
to kind of check yourself to start the process of breaking up with your phone or changing your relationship, however you want to think of.
Yeah, and I won't take credit for it. Catherine Price is a researcher and wrote a book about it. So if you want more information, you can go check out the book. It's called How to Break Up with Your Phone. But came up with this WWW framework. The irony is not lost on me, given that stands for the internet. But it's what for, why, and what else. And the idea being, what are the reasons that you're going to your phone in the first place? Trying to figure out, is there a reason? Is there a purpose? Is it to look for something specific? And she also gives a really easy behavioral technique, like putting a rubber band or a hair tie or a sticker or something on your phone. And that just becomes a cue to remind you, like, why did I pick this up in the first place? Because we do it so naturally. I just pick up my phone and I'm not thinking about it. But if I see that rubber band around my phone or that sticker, then that becomes a cue of like, wait, why did I come here in the first place? Just kind of a reminder. So that's the what for. What are the why is the what are the emotions? Like, what am I craving or missing, or what am I trying to get out of my phone?
Well, specifically, why now?
Yes, in that moment, right?
Correct.
So what brought me to the phone? Is it because I was having anxiety because I wasn't looking at the phone? Is it because of FOMO, a fear of missing out on something?
Yeah, the role there, that's really, is just like the emotional, the affective component. Like what's the driving force?
Yeah.
Okay. I interrupted. So what for, why now?
I appreciate that you saying that, because it really does. You guys talk so much on this podcast about the self-awareness piece of it and trying to figure out, why am I doing the things that I'm doing? And that's basic self-awareness 101 is you need to figure out the emotions behind it that bring you to that place.
And again, this is, I'm sure we've talked on the podcast here just about, we can reference, for example, like James Clear's Atomic Habits and the habit loop. So the cue, the craving, the response, the reward. The cue is just the phone itself.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the point. And as long as it's there and it's present, the cue is always readily available. Mm-hmm. The craving, though, is sort of what we're trying to understand here is just why. Yeah. Why are you even picking it up to begin with? Mm-hmm. What's driving it? What are you feeling that you feel it's necessary to ignore your family, right? To look at the little black box. That's the point there. So, and then the last one. So we have what for, why now, and then
what else, right? So what is the cost? And you kind of hit it nail on the head with the whole ignoring your family piece of the puzzle. But yeah, at what cost is checking your phone in any sort of manner? Again, it seems easy for most of us to separate from like, well, I'm not aimlessly scrolling, but I'm doing something else, right? But what else, whatever you're doing on your phone in that moment, what could it be replaced with? And we already said 4 hours a day is spent on your phone. Now, for some of us, you might need your phone for work aspects. So even if I know you and I both have a time limit spent on social media, right? So our phone will go ahead and give us a big warning, say, hey, you used up all of your social media time. So if you could get some of that 4 hours back in whatever aspect it is, what could you be putting in that time slot? We love to talk about how like, I don't have time to exercise, or I don't have time to read, or I don't have time to meditate. I don't have time is every parent's working individual human's number one excuse. We love it. But thinking about how much aimless time that we use on our phone. I mean, you and I, our social media limit on our phone is 90 minutes, right?
Mine is 60 minutes.
Okay, fine. Mine is 90 minutes. Like, what is that 90 minutes? Like, how could that be used in a more productive way? And again, that's not reading emails, that's not doing work associated things. That's just 90 minutes of uselessness, or 60 minutes. It's such a bummer.
Well, yeah. So the challenge is, again, you can even set limits like that, right? But you can just override it.
Yeah. Which never have I ever done before.
So, but again, this is why I think understanding just the habit loop and stuff, why I referenced it, I think is so important, because the best way that you can combat this is to remove the cue entirely. Mm-hmm. Right. So even just personally, what I've tried to do is basically,
a very good job. I'm giving you credit.
But my point is just like when I get home, essentially I set my phone on the counter in our kitchen.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of there during that dinner time period with the kids and stuff. But generally, like at that point, I just want to spend time with the kids. So rarely, I think,
From
am I really...
5 to 7, your phone is not in your hand.
Correct. But my point is like, it's still sort of there as long as I'm in the kitchen, but we don't just hang out with our kids in the kitchen, right? So once dinner's done, like we're either outside, we're in the playroom, we're somewhere else. And so I've completely removed it. Mm-hmm. It's not in my visual field. Like it's really easy to detach from it, to separate from it, because it's just not in sight. I've suggested that to the people that I work with for years. That's probably the simplest thing that you can do, is if you remove the cue, you remove the craving in a lot of ways, you know? As long as it's present, the craving is going to be there. And I've even noticed for myself, when I don't do a good job of it, for example, is we'll say, okay, after dinner, kids, like we'll go upstairs and we'll play. We'll FaceTime grandma and grandpa.
Yeah.
Right. So now my phone is there.
Yeah.
So we FaceTime grandma and grandpa, which is awesome. But then when we're done, like the phone is still in my hand.
Yeah.
And that's when I find now, like, damn it, I kind of fell into the trap. So anyways.
And my thing is always like, what if they're doing something cute and I need to get a picture? And then I'll always be like, Cory, do you have your phone? And you're like, no, I don't have my phone. I'm like, well, now we missed out on the cute picture.
Yeah, see, that's not as important for me.
Not the cue for you.
But again, I think what you gave there, just kind of the little heuristic to sort of keep in mind, can just be a check. Mm-hmm. Because to your point earlier, it's not that, we're just damning any cell phone use. Sometimes that's very necessary, right, and it can be used for good, even with kids present. The point is, it at least gives you just a couple of questions to kind of run through, as almost like a check, right? Checks and balances of like, is it really that important? So anyways, I wanted to make sure that the conversation kind of came full circle, that we weren't just all doom and gloom here, because that's how it can appear.
Just a little bit.
But if it also does, ideally, if it does like make you question, a little bit of your phone use, especially around kids, I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
That's certainly not a bad thing to put that under the microscope and ask like, well, could I be a little bit better about this? But then to leave you with a little bit of a framework of maybe some simple things that you can do. Hopefully that's helpful for listeners. Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts on the topic? No,
I'm going to do better.
You heard it here first, listeners.
I give you credit. It's something that you've wanted to work on for, like I said, probably a year and a half, maybe 2 years. You've been really good about, and I'd say like 50% of the time I'm with you, phones down, but then the other 50% of the time it's on me, and on me not necessarily for a good reason, right? At that, like, what else? Like, what could you be doing? What's the cost? And the tiny moldable brains of our children, probably not the cost that I want to gamble with. So you are right, Dr. Shaffer. I will give this one to you.
This was your idea, but thank you for that. That's great.
Tip my cap.
All right. Well, Dr. Shaffer, thank you for the conversation. Always great to have you on here. And to our listeners, hopefully you were able to take something away from the conversation. If you have any questions or comments, want to follow up with us, if you just want to like us, review us, any and all, welcome. So we'll see you next time.